Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it's been just a really fascinating day of hearing what everybody else is doing, all the scary stuff that Colin was talking about that we should all be thinking about, and just the different aspects that there are to building apps and making them work for people. So what I'm talking about here is how we optimize the text in our visualizations, whether those are visualizations that you're creating inside an app or in another project. Hopefully this will give you some tips that you can go and apply to whatever work you're doing. Just by way of introduction, I'm Cara Thompson, and I'm a data visualization consultant. And so what that means is I spend my time helping people make better graphs. So my mission in life is to eradicate that moment where someone stands up to give a presentation and they go, you can't really tell from this slide, but what this is showing is, no, don't do that. If we're going to have a graph, let's make it one that is really clear, that people will understand quickly, but also that they'll remember and that they'll continue talking about once you've finished your presentation. So that's what I do. It's through providing training to organizations, through developing dataviz solutions for them, and a bit of mentoring as well. And the way that I ended up there was growing up with a love for patterns in music and language. I grew up in a musical family in France, so there were two languages going on and music, and I was just fascinated with how the human brain makes sense of noise and turns it into something meaningful, which was a really fun thing to look at, and I had the privilege of taking that into a PhD, where I got to play people all sorts of weird sentences and see how the brain reacts, and play them some weird music and see how their brain reacted to that. Wasn't something that people were particularly excited about funding when it came to postdoc work, but I ended up transferring the statistics from that into a job analyzing postgraduate medical exam data and communicating to surgeons about complex patterns in data. Now, those of you who've interacted with surgeons will know they don't like not understanding stuff because they've spent their life at the top of the class. And so when they are faced with something that they don't understand, they find it really frustrating. And I found that data visualization was a great shortcut to help them understand complex patterns in a way that they could instantly see what was going on, and then they could go and dig for more data and more information if they wanted to. So that's a bit of a background of how I've ended up doing this. The main thing that drives me is that I get to make other people's work look good. So I get to maximize the impact of other people's expertise, and there is so much expertise sitting in this room. And all I come along at the end and do is make it look pretty. But making it look pretty is not just about it being pretty, it's about it being functional, it's about it being memorable, and it's about people really deriving the maximum use for the solutions that you have created for them. Today's talk, I gave a really long-winded subtitle to my talk, and I've summarized it into 10 tips for making text better, which I think is more memorable. I'm going to be using the bake-off data package that Alison Hill developed, and you can find that on GitHub if you want to go and reproduce any of the stuff that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be using namespacing, so when you load you don't load the package, but you call the package ;:, and the function, and that avoids your packages ending up with conflicts. And I ended up with that just as I thought, I'll just add one last slide, and suddenly everything broke. So I'll talk about that at the end. Choose your own pipe. I like the old one. There's some stuff that it can do that the new pipe doesn't do yet, but choose your own pipe if you want to reuse any of this code. And the code and the slides will be available on my talks page, and if you get stuck with anything, just send me an email. I'm more than happy to help people if they get stuck with stuff. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to be using data from the bake-off, so I guess it would be traditional to start with the on your marks, get set, bake. So we need to set up an initial plot that we can then go on and modify. And I would say there's 10 things to cover. If you're watching the clock and thinking she's never going to make it, I will speed up as we go. So we're going to lay some foundations, and then we'll pick up the pace later. So first of all, we need to create some data for ourselves. I've loaded the tidyverse package. I said I wasn't going to load packages, but I'm not going to make any apology for doing that. And then I've taken the bakes from the bake-off package, and just done a bit of data wrangling to give us some key components that I picked, mostly randomly because I was interested to see how they were used. Chocolate, raspberry, sponge, or a genoise, and let's just get that right. It's a genoise, not a Genoese, or whatever it is that people are calling it, in the same way that a raspberry is a framboise, not a framboise, or however you might try and go about that, so yeah, genoise. So we've got those 4 ingredients, which I thought would be fun to look at, and the rhubarb is probably picked because it felt like a very British thing to include in your bakes. And then what we want to do is feed that into ggplot and get a plot out of it. So here we go. We have a plot. It's perfectly functional. It's a starting point. The colors are the default ones that we've got, and they look different on that screen to how they look here, but that's okay. You still get the general idea. Once we've done that, my first tip is to get rid of the gray background and to use theme minimal. Just declutters things a little bit visually, and it's got some nice defaults in terms of where everything sits. And then we need to add a bit of text. So we've got a title, and we've got a subtitle, and we can scroll along and see that that's a fairly long string. But the take-home here is that people use chocolate a lot in the bake-off, and that there are no surprises here, and that I'm quite happy to see that. I also haven't finished watching the latest episode of the bake-off, so do not tell me who won, because I don't want to know just yet. We can't see that text, so I'm going to make it slightly bigger, and theme minimal has got a nice base text size argument that you can use to do that, and everything scales accordingly, which is very useful when you've created your plots. And then I'm going to add a wee mini tip there. Get your bars in order. If you're looking at things and you're wanting people to compare which one is used most and which one is used least, try and get them in order. There's lots of different ways to do that. I've just chose to redo it as a factor after arranging the data set in order. And then I find it makes more sense on its side. Somehow I find that easier to look at, to see that chocolate is the one that takes up the most space and that gets used most, and then the other ones decrease from there. So there we go, we have a plot. Last thing, use plain English. If we're going to have axis titles, let's just make them plain English if we can. Again, it just avoids that cognitive load of people having to think, what was that again? I can't remember the acronym. Just make it easy for people is the bottom line. So there we go, we have a perfectly functional plot. It's got all the information in it. But looking at it, I just feel a little bit like this kitten, right? There's a lot going on. There's actually not that much information in the plot, but the fact that there's text all over the place is drawing my eyes in lots of different directions, and I don't really know where to start looking. The legend is taking up a lot of space, subtitles going off the end of it, and this is kind of what I meant by the text stealing the show in a really bad way, that your text ends up taking up too much of the energy that you're putting into understanding what's going on in the plot. So we can fix that. First thing, decrease reliance on text. Now, if this is your reaction because you thought I was going to talk about text, yes, you're right. But we need to do a few things first so that we can then decrease our reliance, so we can then make the text better once we're not quite so dependent on reading every single word that's there. So the first thing we're going to do is embrace the notion of kind of color symbolism. Those of you who've come from the world of psychology or psycholinguistics might have come across this question before. Which one is Booba and which one is Kiki? It's a fairly clear international consensus that the one that is really spiky is the one that's called Kiki. And this was first looked at in the 1920s, and people are still looking at it today with all sorts of variants. But there is a kind of relationship between the way that things look and the way that we hear them, and we naturally do make those associations. So what we're going to try and do is make those associations with some colors. And I ended up creating this color palette, and when I first generated it on my screen, it actually made my mouth water, which feels a bit random, but it did, so I thought I'd be honest about that. Here we go, we've got some chocolate, some raspberry, some genoise or sponge, and some rhubarb thrown into the mix. It looks better on my screen and on that one than it does there. But those are the colors, and they do the trick. So let's just apply those to our plot and see what it does. Here's our starting point, and here's the plot with those colors thrown into it. And you're already not having to look at the legend quite so much because you can remember which bar is which because the colors look like the thing that they're depicting. Now, it's obviously easy to do with food ingredients, not necessarily as easy to do with abstract concepts that you might be looking at in your app. In that case, you want to think a bit more abstractly about it, or you want to at least be consistent across your plot so that once you've clocked, okay, the purple one is the one that I'm interested in, you can follow it all the way through your app. We can get rid of the legend at this point. The legend was always redundant, but it's more obvious that it's redundant now that we've got those colors that make more sense to us. We can get rid of the axis text because we don't really need to know that. The axis text, with the axis title, the text that's there already tells us what it is that we're looking at. And so we've gone from a plot that was perfectly functional but a bit overwhelming to one that is already a little bit better and easier to process with not that many steps. So that's step number one. Number two, we're going to add some text hierarchy into it. So text hierarchy is one of these things that's so much easier to demonstrate than it is to describe. So have a look at this. What this shows you is that the way that you format your text directs people as to what the most important thing to look at is. And so you'll have some text here that you'll probably completely skip over, that you might come back to later. You'll have the main message right in the middle. And as people who create visualizations and apps, it's up to us to harness this so that we're in control of what comes across as the main thing that people should be looking at. So let's go and do that and add some text hierarchy into our plots. So this is our starting point where we were. And is the clicker doing the thing? Yeah. We're going to first do a bit of text hierarchy with some color. So I've got a slightly lighter chocolate color for the text. It's going to be really subtle, especially on this screen. And then we're going to override it in the axis text because theme minimal has its own axis text color. So we have to re-implement that in the axis text. And then we're going to change it in the title. And I appreciate it's going off the edge of the wee coding bit here. So the title is a slightly darker shade of brown than the rest of it, but it's subtle, but it's still there. We're going to then make the size bigger for the title so that it stands out, again, a little bit better. And then we're going to add a bit of personality. You know, when you're thinking about your apps, try and make it not look like it could be anywhere. So add your own brand fonts. Go and think about what is the main feeling that you want to convey with your apps. Don't go too quirky. Try and stick to something that is readable, and there are tips for doing that out there. Chat to me about that afterwards. But yeah, let's just add our fonts in. So we're going to change the fonts. I've gone for a quirky font for the title, which was the one that looked the most like the font that they use for the bake-off marketing material. And we have a plot here that has more text hierarchy than the plots that we've seen before. And you're already seeing, okay, everybody loves chocolate. That's easy. That's a message that I can remember. Whereas previously, you were looking for all sorts of clues as to what the main thing was that you should be looking at. Getting fonts to work in R can be really frustrating, but the world has got so much better over the last few years. So System Fonts is the package that you want to install in order to get this to work. And here's the current received wisdom. I have spent, I don't know how many hours amounting to days troubleshooting fonts. So this is about to fast track that for you, and you can thank me later. But what you want to do is install the fonts locally on your device, or if this is the app, you need to make sure they're loaded somewhere in the background. Restart RStudio if you're doing it on your desktop. Load up the package System Fonts, or if that's just sitting in the background, that should do the job as well. And that will install with it RAG and text shaping, which will make the fonts play nicely together. And then you want to set your graphics device as well to AGG. You do that in your RStudio options. Just here, there's a little drop down that you need to look for. So there we go. That's part one of troubleshooting. And when you get to this stage, you'll have plots that work with your fonts in the RStudio viewer and that work with your fonts when you export with GGSave. And then you compile your Quarto document or your Markdown document, and the fonts are just the default ones. And then you spend another 3 days trying to figure out what's going on. And what you needed to do there is set your dev argument inside your knitter options, and then that will keep everything nice. But yeah, if you play around with it long enough, you will reach this point where you just think, I'm done, I just need to throw it all in the bin. You don't. There's a blog post that I've linked at the bottom here, written by June Cho, which is absolutely brilliant for debugging fonts and helping them get all set up in R. So go and have a look at that if you feel like you're at your wit's end. So we've got the text hierarchy, and we noticed earlier that the subtitle was running off the edge of the plot. There is a very simple solution to that, which is within the ggtext package, element text box simple will wrap your subtitle so that it fits inside your plot. So you no longer have to try and figure out where do I need to wrap this long string, and then you change the size of your plot and you need to go and rewrap it somewhere else, and it just goes a bit mad. The only thing with it is that it puts it inside a box, and so the more text you have, that box is going to move around, and you need to have a little think about the alignment. So we will fix that alignment, and where am I fixing that? Down here. So yeah, just fixing the vertical alignment of the subtitle so that it comes up to the bottom of the title and doesn't go over the edge of that title. Then we want to add a little bit of breathing space. So we're going to add a margin around the subtitle, a margin around the title there as well, and we have a plot with a bit more text hierarchy that just makes it a lot easier to read. So again, if you do the side-by-side comparison between these two, each step is a really small thing, but it makes a big difference. And if you imagine that you have a whole bunch of plots that you're looking at on your app or in your report, you're saving people a lot of energy by just implementing these simple steps. Okay, so that was 2 out of 10. We will pick up the pace and keep going. So the third thing we want to try and do is reduce unnecessary eye movement. So when we've got a lot of unnecessary eye movement going on, I mean, you're looking in one bit and then you're looking in the other bit and you're trying to reconcile lots of different pieces of information. And again, that detracts from the main point. So we're going to, first of all, remove a bit of space. We don't need quite that much gap between the axis labels and the start of the bars. And then we're going to use ggtext again. Have I mentioned that I really love ggtext? I use it most of the time. What we're going to do is add some text boxes. Now, they're quite hard to see there, but what they're doing is they're pulling in the information that we've provided at the start of our ggplot. So we said that we wanted the X and Y aesthetics to be aligned with the ends of the bars. We said that the fill was tied to the ingredient that we were looking at. And so all this is doing is adding a label to that and taking all of the rest of that information. So it's putting text boxes that are kind of right on the middle. The middle of the text box is at the end of the bar, and then it's coloring the text box according to the ingredient, just recycling all that information that we gave it earlier. We're going to put it into white so that we can debug it a little bit and see where the boxes actually are. And then once we've done that, we can do a bit of formatting. So we can increase the size of the text, and we can change the alignments of the text as well, so that we want the text to be inside at the bar, and we want the text to be right aligned, can never do left and right, to the edge of the box. So we've got stuff formatted, but we need to work on this a little bit more. The fun thing that we can do with geom text box is do some conditional alignments. So we can say if the bar is a really long bar, we'll put the text inside it, and if the bar is a really short bar, then we'll put the text outside of it. And all we need is these lines of code just here, and we get ourselves a plot which does that. Again, we're going to get rid of the boxes in a bit, and that's fine. And then once we figure that out, well, why don't we just add some colors in as well? That sounds great. Okay, so if it's inside the box, we'll make it white, and if it's outside the box, then we'll make it that chocolate color. Only that's not what's happened here. You probably recognize the default ggplot colors. So what it's done is it said, oh, you've given me an extra variable that I need to create some colors for. I'll just go and do that for you. The solution to that is to add scale color identity in. And then you're saying, use as the color this string of text that I'm giving you. And because we're feeding it hex codes, it's going to be able to do that for us. So we've got that sorted. Then we need to add the personality and the branding that we've been talking about. We can get rid of the axis text at this point because we've moved the ingredients inside the bar. There's no point repeating them in two different places. And then we want to think, actually, what is the thing that we were wanting to look at? Maybe we could add how many bakes we've actually used chocolate and raspberries. And we can do that by just doing a little bit of pasting inside the label. And for those of you who like playing around with CSS to make your text look nicer, that's all I've done here as well. So I've just made sure that the number would be bigger text size than the ingredient that we're talking about. And there we go, we've got that. Now at this point, we can tweak the alignments. We can also think, do we need the rest of this? Can we get rid of the grid? Can we get rid of the axis? You could probably get away with getting rid of everything in this case. Now this won't be appropriate for every plot that you're creating. Sometimes the grid is actually really useful. But this is a simple example of ways that you can just declutter absolutely everything. And the last thing was to think, how would I actually say this? It was interesting that Tan was talking about getting the log messages to be aligned with how he would think about things or what the questions would be. As I was reading this, I was thinking, I wouldn't say chocolate bakes 206. I would say there were 206 chocolate bakes. And so I've just reordered the information in the bar, again, so that I'm not having to read something and then reorder it in my head to make sense of it. So there we go. We've got some unnecessary eye movements that we've got rid of, and we've got our plots looking all nice and fancy. Declutter, declutter, declutter. We've already done a bit of decluttering. At this point, you might be saying, OK, well, that was easy, but that was a really small amount of data. It was summary data. It's not fair. You're cheating. Fine. Let's do this in hard mode. We're going to have a look at how the bakers performed through the technical challenges as they went through the series of the Great British Bake Off. And this is the data that we need to do that, and this is what the plot looks like. Yes, this is the right reaction. Do not do this to people in your apps. This is not helpful for anybody. You've got far too many colors going on. It's just all a bit overpowering, as they might say. So we'll try and figure out, okay, how could we declutter this? First thing you could try is some facets. Okay, let's try that. Yep, it's still pretty messy, so that's not really doing it for us. We've got a lot of information that we want to be displaying here. How about we just show less data? So we'll just have series 6 to 8 instead. Yeah, we could try that, but it's still pretty messy and difficult to interpret, and if you wanted to add a legend onto this, it would be really tricky. So we need to focus in on the story. Okay, what is the main story that we want to tell? I think I want to look at how the winners did. Okay, so how did the winner of each series progress through the technical challenges? This is where we bring in GG Highlight. So GG Highlight is absolutely brilliant if you want to just show one line or one set of data points and how they compare to everything else. And you make everything else the background, and you're just coloring the one that you're interested in. So this is what it does. You've just got one line that shows over the top of the rest of them. But here we've got way too many lines in the background. What it's done is it pulled in everybody. It's ignored the faceting. So we need to just say calculate per facet, and then it just keeps everything that's relevant to the facets. As I said at the start, this will be available on my website. So if you're frantically scribbling down some code, don't. You can copy paste everything. These are quarter slides, so it's easy to copy paste from them. We're going to then color everything by series and change the color scheme a little bit, just to one that I think looks a little bit nicer. And then we can also add in some geom text path. So geom text path follows the curve of the line that you're showing. So it will modify the text so that it fits on it, put it at the right angle. If your text goes around a corner at the point where it will go around the corner with the curve as it moves. So again, just a really, really useful package when we're thinking about making the most of text in our visualizations, so that we don't have to have labels and arrows absolutely everywhere. Might as well have some more fun with GG Text, see how they started and how they ended. So we've got some text boxes here at the very start. So I've just kind of filtered so that we've got episodes 1 and episode 10, and then we're labeling it by the score that they achieved in the technical. We can do some alignment stuff like we did earlier. I'm just going to go through this quickly because you already know how to do this now. So we align stuff so that if it sits on one end of the plot, it's aligned one way. If it sits on the other end of the plot, it's aligned the other way. Get rid of the boxes, put in some personality, and then add a labeler function to our strip text, which is the text that goes up here, just to clarify what each of the facets is talking about. And then we can format that as well, make it look nice, add a bit of space so that everything has some room to breathe, and then we can do a bit of decluttering as well by changing the colors. Now, you probably can't see the difference between these two, really, but the lines of NA people in the background are aligned in the colors to the rest of the color scheme that we're using, and it's one extra bit of decluttering if you don't have a color that jars with the rest of it. Add a bit of text hierarchy. We want to see the names of the winners nice and clearly in our plots. And there we go. We've gone from something that was really pretty horrendous to something that tells the story that we're interested in telling. Again, all done within R. You don't have to go and create this MS Paint with your text boxes on their side. It's fine if you want to mix your tools. That's absolutely fine. But I don't need to convince you guys that data changes all the time. And so the last thing you want is to spend all of your time getting something to look really nice, and then you have to start it again when your colleague comes to you and says, that piece of data that I thought I'd lost, I found it. And you go, oh, yeah, yay. No, if you code it all in and you get your annotations to change as a function of the data, then you will be absolutely safe against those situations. So, really quick tip for number 5. Tie your text to the data. I've reviewed a lot of apps for clients where they've done this kind of stuff. They've put numbers in over the lines. Try and make them the same color so that then you're not trying to guess which number ties to which. And then you can get rid of the legend as well. And it just makes it a little bit cleaner. You're not trying to guess which rankings apply to which winner, because it's all sitting as it should. Tip number 6, and I'm just keeping an eye on my time, we're okay. Do not neglect your tables. The tables form an important part of the apps that you're building and the reports that you're building, and we can do all of this in the tables. I'm not going to show you any code at this bit in the slide because it doesn't fit. Okay, if you have the code for the tables and then the table next to it, it's not going to work. But I promise that the full code for the table will be on my website, so you can go and have a look at that. So let's see, how do we apply all of this to our tables? here is our starting point, and actually I especially went to get extra data. This is not inside the bake-off package, so that we had stuff to look at, and someone had very helpfully listed all the technical bakes that have taken place throughout all these series. And this table is made using React table, so it's an interactive table, which means that you can sort it and have a look at the things that you're interested in seeing. But at this moment, it's just a bit of a wall of text. So we're going to see how we can make it better. Plain English, we're going to change our headers so that it's the same as the axis titles. You want it to be really clear what it is that you're looking at. I thought I'd make the dates easier, and I thought I was being really clever, and turn them into strings. But if you do that, then they don't sort in the way that dates should be sorting. So that was a mistake on my part. So instead, I ended up sorting the dates like this, which it just tidies up a little bit, and it makes it a format that people are more used to seeing. Obviously, if you're working with clients in the US and in the UK, you're going to have to find a way to clarify all of that. But yeah, have a think about your dates and how you can make them work better. In terms of your numbers, if you've got numbers that are like this, it's quite hard to compare between them because they're all rounded. They've got different numbers of numbers. Yeah, different numbers of digits after the decimal place, which makes it tricky. So if you're going to be doing some rounding, force them to have the same number of digits, and you can do that quite easily in R. I just thought I'd write them out in full because this is in millions of viewers, and again, just a little bit easier to do. And then it's generally considered a good idea to try and use a bit of monospace font if you're putting numbers in, because it means that a number that is of a different order of magnitude will stand out compared to the rest of them. So it'll be really obvious that you've got an extra digit in that number. So that's worth having a look at as well. What else can we do to make this table look a little bit nicer? Avoid too many capitals. The technical challenge here had a capital for each letter, which is causing me to think it's a new piece of information. If I make that into sentence case instead, it just reads a little bit nicer. I just see, okay, this is just one phrase. This is okay. I don't need to have process every single word. And then we can add a bit of text hierarchy with some color and some text sizes, add a bit of personality, bring in the fonts that we've been talking about since the start, but keep the monospace fonts there. And you can find monospace fonts that fit with your brand fonts as well. That's quite easy to do. We then want to make the rows easier to see. Again, this is really subtle, but I have added a very faint zebra stripe, just so that people are not in danger of losing their path between the start of the table and the end of it. But if you're using interactive tables, then a hover might be better. And again, it's hard to see on that screen, but on this screen here, there's a very faint zebra line that you're just moving around with your mouse. And again, you're just focusing on the stuff that you want to see. Reduce unnecessary eye movements by aligning your text. Avoid wrapping stuff so that all the rows are the same. So if you have a look here, we can see that the coffee and walnut Battenberg takes up quite a lot of space in the table. And if we rearrange stuff, we've got row heights that keep varying. And again, that's forcing us to keep jumping between the things that we're looking at. So we're going to avoid wrapping stuff, but then the coffee and walnut Battenberg doesn't fit anymore. So we need to change our column widths and make sure that these work nicely. So these are all principles of how to make text work in dataviz and how to make dataviz work that we're applying to tables. Really worth thinking about your tables as a form of dataviz and thinking how you can keep them going. What's the story? Get stuff in the order that you're interested in. And then try and think of a bit of show versus tell. So what are we trying to look at here? I tried doing a bit of color conditioning to help us see the series when they change. I would have applied it to the whole table, but then it just looked like a rainbow had had an accident with the laptop, so it was just a bit mad. Use rainbow and color conditioning stuff wisely, because it can get a little bit much. But actually, here's one thing that you can do quite nicely in R. This is Reactable Formatter. You can add bars in, which allow you to make much more sense of the numbers than just having those numbers printed in. And suddenly our story is a little bit easier to explore. And then we can add some meaningful colors in. So those of you who've been following for the Bake Off for a while may see where we're heading with this one. But we've got the bars standing out, and we can see how different colored bars compared to the other. We should probably be a bit more specific about what's going on. So we've got Mel and Sue and Noel and Co. in terms of UK viewer ratings. And yeah, it was just a fun thing to have a look at, to see how things have evolved as the hosts of the bake-off have changed over time. So we've applied everything to our tables, and we've gone from something that looked like this, which is just a wall of pretty inaccessible text, to something that looks like this, where we can tell a story much more easily by adding a bit of show versus tell into that. One thing that you can also think about doing is signposting additional information. So you don't have to throw all the information at people at once, which is exactly the opposite of what I'm doing right now. I'm throwing all the information at you in the hope that one of these is going to stick and you're going to go away and apply it to your app and your report. But you can signpost stuff. People don't have to see everything from the very start. You know, I was working with a client recently who had a lot of line graphs in their app, and they had put the number corresponding to the value of the line above every single point where the line changed. And that's fine, but it just makes it really overwhelming visually, whereas if you put it in a tooltip instead, you can show the overall trend, and then the client can go and explore the precision if they want to do that. So in order to do that, it's time to get interactive with our graphs, and my preferred package for doing that is the one that I'm going to call ggiraf. Looking at the logo, maybe it should be giraffe. A bit of a debate about this, but then there's a function inside it that is ggiraf giraffe, so I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to say. I'm going to call it ggiraf, and you can come and tell me that I'm wrong at the end. That's fine. What I like about it is that it allows you to show the main data story in what looks like a static plot, and then you can allow people to access extra detail if they want to, and see the stuff that they're particularly interested in. The thing that I like about this particular package is that it shows you can end up, if people can access the stuff that they're interested in, it shows them lots of information about one thing rather than an indigestible amount of information about absolutely everything, which they're not going to retain anyway. But the thing that I like about ggiraf is that it keeps the ggplot styling that you've been working so hard to create. I tried ggplotly a few times, and it had very strong opinions about stuff and totally changed all the work that I'd put into it. Perfectly fine, and if that's the easier one for you to use and you will use it, go for it, but give ggiraf a go if you want to be a bit more fancy with your texts and stuff. So I thought I would recreate the technical challenge from episode 1 of this season, of the current season of Great British Bake Off, and see if I could make that chocolate and raspberry cake that they show at the end of the opening sequence in R. All I've done is grabbed the bakes that included chocolate and raspberry, and some of them included both of them, filtered the data by that, popped it into a plot. This is essentially a pie chart, right, with nothing, with just one variable in it. And then over the top, these dots are just created using geom jitter. They're all given the same coordinate, and then it nicely scatters them about. I think I'd probably get told off by Paul for not having enough finesse in where I was placing the raspberries, but that's not something that we're concerned about just now. I just wanted to show you how easy it is to go from that to an interactive plot. All I've had to change in the code is go from geom jitter to geom jitter interactive. And then I've provided some indication of what it should use for the tooltip content. And then the other thing I've had to change is the size of the points, and don't ask me why. There are variations in the way that the sizes get output, which is beyond the stuff that I was able to research in the run to this, but just changing the size did the job. And here we have, using the ggiraf giraffe function, an interactive plot in which if you hover over a raspberry, it will tell you what was in that bake, which, yeah, there we go. It was easy, and that's it. The important thing, if you're going to do this, is to not hide the cutlery. So people used to say don't spoon feed people, but also don't hide the cutlery. Make sure that if there is something more for them to explore, that you show them that that is an option. So I've just added a wee subtitle there that tells us what we can do and what we're looking at. And in the process of creating these tooltips, I'm going to come to my 8th tip, which is to manipulate text inside of tibbles. Now, you might love working with regex and get that right every time, and actually it is a really powerful tool. I quite like it. And there's that epic win of having got the right string to feed into it, which is very satisfying. But the tibbles are quite a useful setup to combine information in different ways. So I'm just going to show you what I did. I totally mixed and matched the functions that I was using. There is some if-else going on here, whereas previously I'd used case-when. So we're just tidying up the names of the ingredients, getting rid of extra spaces, getting rid of punctuation marks and stuff that will make it sit nicer. And then I'm pasting it together with a bit of CSS, padding the number of the series and the number of the episodes so that that looks consistent across them. That thing that I was saying earlier about keeping your number of digits consistent just makes it a little bit easier. And we're pulling in the name of the baker as well so we can see who did what. And this is what the text string looks like that we're going to feed in to the tooltip. So let's have a look at what that does. So we've now got the name of the bake, what it is that they created, who made it, and what series and what episode it was made in. There's a fun one here, and I'll not find it, but you know, the one that Ian threw in the bin was listed there as not displayed or something. Anyway, we've got all of this done. And then we need to optimize the functionality. We've been talking about making the most of text. Those tooltips are pretty ugly. So what we need to do is harness the power of CSS to make those nicer. And there's a great tip that I learned very recently that I'm going to pass on to you, which is a very small thing to do, but it makes a big difference. So the CSS code is this really long string in here. But it's nice because it is just CSS code. So there's nothing particularly fancy. You don't have to learn a new set of tools, a new set of options. You are just feeding it CSS. So if you have experience of doing that, then it's quite easy to read and it's quite easy to manipulate. And I haven't yet found anything, any bit of CSS that it doesn't understand. So it should be absolutely fine to work with the stuff that you've got. So what I've done here, given the tooltips the background color that corresponds to the dark chocolate that we've been looking at, the white inside it isn't quite white. I just wanted to match it in with the rest of it, but go as light as you can so that you get a good contrast there. I have also changed the font so that it matches the font that we've been looking at. The next thing I wanted to do was add a bit of padding around it so that the text doesn't go right to the edges of it. So you can see that happening there. And I also rounded the corners. Again, you can play around with the aesthetics and see what you want to do with that and what works best. I then made sure that the maximum width of the tooltip was fixed so that we didn't end up with tooltips that took up a huge amount of space and then you're scanning a lot of space horizontally to get to the information that you need. So again, that's just an easy call, max width. There we go. What else did I do? I added a bit of line height spacing so that we can see it's subtle, but it's a bit squished here vertically. Whereas on the next slide, there's a little bit more breathing space between the lines. These are all really small touches, and you're probably thinking, I'm going overboard here with the text, but it does make a difference to how easy it is to read something. And then this magic tip that I learned very, very recently by chatting to Oliver Schondorfer, whose resources I highly recommend if you're looking to really nerd out on fonts and typography for your user interfaces. He's absolutely brilliant. And he recommended increasing the spacing between your letters when you have really small text. And again, it just makes it more readable. So this is it with the spacing increased. This is what we had originally. And it's just a bit more relaxing to look at when the spacing is increased. So there we go. That's the tooltips optimized. I have one last one to go, but I'm aware that I'm getting close to the end of my time. Hopefully I'm still on time, giving everything some space to breathe. So this is the starting plot that we had. It looks fine, but let's see what we can do. At this point, I had to detach the React table formatter and the React table packages because there was conflict in terms of units that was giving me an error message that I had never seen before at 10:30 last night. So that was a fun moment. But we've got that sorted. So yeah, name spacing is the way to go if you can. All I'm doing here is adding a margin around the plot. Now, you can't see it because this is a white plot on a white background, but we'll see it when we put it on a black background later. If I change the line height of the subtitle, it just breathes a tiny bit better. I'm going to add a bit of space between the bottom of the subtitle and the start of the bar. And there we go. That's it. We've given everything a bit more space to breathe. It's subtle, but it just makes it a little bit less overwhelming to look at as a piece of information. That's it. We've made it. We got to the end. I covered 10 tips in the space of 40 minutes. And here are the tips that we looked at. Decrease reliance on text by using colors well. Add some text hierarchy so that you are in control of what is perceived as being most important. Reduce unnecessary eye movements. Think about where you're looking and whether you can put some text boxes there so that you don't have to scan across the whole thing. Declutter, declutter, declutter. tie your text to your data using colors, if you can, using arrows if you can't. Just make it really obvious so you're not having to guess what belongs where. Don't neglect your tables, signpost additional information, manipulate your text in tables, optimize text functionality, and give everything some space to breathe. And at this point, it's over to you to go and take these tips and apply them to the stuff that you've been doing. Plenty of empty bake-off benches there waiting for people to give it a go. But on a more serious note, if you get stuck on anything, do reach out to me. There's loads of stuff on my website of talks that I've given which walk through these at a slightly slower pace and where I give people time to go away and try it out and come back and we debug together. Yeah, and next time you hear somebody say, oh, I've got all this stuff and I need to show it, but I don't know how to do it, feel free to send them my way because these are the kind of people that I like talking to and I like helping as well. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope there's at least one thing from this that you can take and apply to the stuff that you're building. Thank you very much.